Hello, I'm Jen Gordon. I'm with YWCA Cambridge and I am moderating the event today. I would like to thank everybody for coming. This is our first event in our series, our Knowledge and Action series. We're going to be looking at women's homelessness in Cambridge today, using a service provider and community advocate lens through this panel discussion. As I've sort of shared, but for those of you who have just come in, this will be a recorded event. Provided you keep your camera off, you will not be part of that recording. If you do put it on, you might be briefly part of that recording until we're able to kick you back out. So just keep a lens to that. We'll do cameras off, please. And thank you. I do want to let you know that this recording will be made available to you and everybody else who has signed up after this event. Will be emailing that out, as well as some information about our next event in the speaker series, which will happen at the end of January 31st, and we will be gathering municipal and regional elected officials from Cambridge to talk about what we can do around women's homelessness through that political realm and lens. So that will also be sent to you. I want to start today with a land acknowledgement. So while we are meeting virtually and joining from various places across the province, I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land to which I live and work and that YWCA Cambridge is a part of takes place on land that belongs to and is a territory traditionally used by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Attawandaron or neutral peoples. I also acknowledge that enduring presence, deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. Taking a moment at the beginning of events like this to make this acknowledgement is an invitation for reflection and a reminder of the gratitude and accountability non-Indigenous people owe to the first people of this land. Land acknowledgements are just one step on a path toward reconciliation. Reconciliation is about building relationships of trust, respect, and friendship. It is about acknowledging both the lived experience of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and the experiences passed down through generations. Reconciliation reflects prejudice and requires that all those within its country learn about Indigenous cultures, history, and experiences. The dishonor of treaties being a part of both history as well as current day experiences. YWCA Cambridge acknowledges that reconciliation must include walking with Indigenous people as they lead the way. So we have some expectations about the event today. This event is meant to be a learning opportunity. Like many social issues these days in Cambridge, the topic of homelessness has become politicized. If you've come here to spread any hate, hurt, or to blame women experiencing homelessness for anything, I would kindly ask you to find a different avenue and leave now. This is not the event for you. For those who are here to learn, we're here to create a space conducive of having difficult conversations that are vulnerable. And so we'll be monitoring this event for the chat throughout to ensure that we can maintain that space. After this panel event, Ashley Skatuma from Waterloo Region Community Legal Services will be giving us a brief update on two recent encampment decisions from Ontario and the implications that these decisions have for people experiencing homelessness in Waterloo Region. So if you're interested in that, past the post panel here, you'll have an opportunity to learn from her. For questions, we will have 10 to 15 minutes at the end of this panel discussion for questions. You're able to put your questions in the chat as we go along. We welcome that. And we'll be pulling some questions from that chat to ask at the end of the event. So that's where your questions can be. Without further ado, I'm going to reintroduce myself since we've had some people join us. My name is Jennifer Gordon. I'm with YWCA Cambridge, and I will be moderating this event. I have here Marjorie Knight, who is a community advocate on women's homelessness in Cambridge and honestly beyond. Cameron Dearlove, who is the ED of Porchlight Counseling and Addiction Services. Roz Gunn, who's the Director of Communications and Advocacy at YWCA Cambridge, and Courtney Waterfall, the Chapter Director of Shelter Movers in Southwestern Ontario. Thank you to all of you for taking the time to be here with us and share your insights. We're here to talk about women's homelessness in Cambridge. So I'm going to say, let's dive into that topic. The first question I have here for you all is for all of you to answer. So feel free to choose who goes first or whoever's most excited to speak first. The question I have for you is, as a service provider / advocate, what do you know to be true about women's homelessness in Cambridge and its intersections with gender-based violence?
I would say that there really is nowhere for women to go in Cambridge. There really is not. As a service provider, having to tell women that they have to take their babies and go to a different city to find shelter away from their support systems is actually quite cruel. And I often have to pay to send them there because that is just another added cost that they can't afford. But truthfully, there is very little for them in Cambridge. I mean, once in a while, you can manage to squeeze somebody into a motel room, but by and large, it's not available. So to be female and homeless in Cambridge means that it's almost as if you don't exist. And it's a really awful situation.
I'll add on to what Marjorie said, and really happy to have the space to have this conversation and really thrilled to see the turnout today. So that's really awesome. I would just add to what Marjorie's saying, because Marjorie, being frontline, sees the homelessness crisis unfolding right in front of her. She sees it getting worse, but the broader public is not aware of the fact that homelessness, women experiencing homelessness are here. It's a serious issue. But they're largely invisible. And there are so many reasons why, especially women and gender diverse individuals, stay hidden in their homelessness, especially if they have children. They wouldn't want to risk being apprehended if they don't have an adequate place for themselves and their children. So they're going to hide their homelessness. And also just the research sort of bears out that women are less likely to interact with housing and homelessness services, meaning they don't really show up in the data. So one of the biggest avenues we have for calculating homeless numbers in any community is through the point in time count. But that's really, and I know that folks who are using this point in time count are working to sort of change the methodology so that they are reaching people who are experiencing hidden homelessness, but still we're not there yet. And so we're missing a whole huge swath of people who are experiencing homelessness and aren't showing up in the data. I also want to add to that, I think it was the Financial Accountability Office, or maybe it was the Plan to End Chronic Homelessness interim report. Sorry for misattributing, but it noted that about 80% of people experiencing homelessness across the province are actually hidden. So any numbers that we talk about, and I know people always want numbers, how many people are homeless? How many people are homeless? We can't answer it. A lot of people are hidden in their homelessness. And now that we have the right to housing, that means that if you are in inadequate housing, or if you're in an unsafe, violent situation, or you're overcrowded, or you're sharing a room, or you're unwillingly staying with family and friends, that is de facto homeless. You are unhoused. You do not have permanent, safe, affordable, adequate housing. So the extent of the crisis is quite extensive, and women are bearing the brunt of it. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, just to add to that, it is very hidden in our community. A lot of people aren't aware of the numbers that are out there, and the violence that's happening in the encampments and in some of the places that they are able to stay. We've seen an increase just over the past few months and in the summer where, 10 to 12% of the clients that we're serving have experienced abuse in the encampment that they're at or wherever they are temporarily staying. And there's nowhere safe for them to go here unless they're leaving the city or the region. We've recently had a number of survivors that are returning to their abuser. We know that happens often. We know that survivors will return, 7 times before they leave for good. But the decision to return now is because they have nowhere else to go, not because they're making the decision to go back because that's where they want to be.
I'll just add that this is not a new issue. I think, there's been a lot of attention this year, and thanks to the YWCA for all the advocacy work on this and making it an issue. But it's been a long time that this has been an issue, not just when it comes to women's homelessness, but housing and homelessness in general. Across the spectrum of housing need, Cambridge is lacking. I can talk more about that later. But just to tell a bit of a story, when Project Willow came out, which if you haven't read it, be sure to check it out. When Jen hosted an info session about Project Willow, I immediately followed up with her. And one of the stats that came out of that was that 83% of the women surveyed in KW stayed in violent or abusive housing situation because it felt safer than homelessness. And 73% avoided using co-ed shelters because of safety concerns. And so my email to Jen was, this report is amazing and it's so important. By the way, here's a survey of women in KW who are saying, we don't want to use co-ed shelters because we feel it's unsafe. And in Cambridge, we don't have that option. And so how much more unsafe is it for women in Cambridge when you don't even have that co-ed option, let alone a safe space for women to go. So, this is, we're communities, right? Whether it's Cambridge or the region of Waterloo that have declared intimate partner violence an epidemic, and yet we still haven't made sure that women have a safe place to go in this community.
Almost all of you have talked about this idea of missing services and what that means. So I'm going to have Cameron and Roz speak to this next question, and then I invite the rest of the panelists to add anything that they wish to add. Cambridge has been described as a service desert. What is the biggest challenge you are currently seeing that's coming from this service desert?
So, I did ask to answer this question because this is something that, I've certainly been talking about for years, the service desert in Cambridge, and it's not, it's not exclusive to housing and homelessness or women's homelessness. But, if you look across kind of the social support sector, we are missing programs, we're missing supports in Cambridge. Of course, they tend to be in the larger population centers, so usually centered in KW. But what that means is that often, people lack the same kind of access that others do. And when I talked about the full spectrum of housing, we're thinking and talking specifically about shelter, but there's a whole spectrum of housing needs that we have in Cambridge that aren't being addressed. So just a few stats for you. So in Cambridge, Cambridge makes up 23.5% of the population of the region of Waterloo. If we look at just the urban population where we tend to have, homelessness and housing resources, it's 26.5% of the region. When it comes to shelter, we have 18.5% of the shelter beds in Cambridge. And of note, 0% of the youth beds, 0% of the women's beds. So all of those, more specialized beds are in KW, which means that women have to either choose to not access shelter or go to a different city. 78 beds in KW for women, and clearly that's not enough even in KW, let alone the 0% that we have in Cambridge. When it comes to supportive housing, we have 18.2% of the supportive housing beds, across the region. Again, 0% of the beds that are specifically for women and women-led families, as exist in KW. When it comes to affordable housing, I don't have the numbers there, but I'm gonna take a guess that probably, along with the rest of the spectrum of housing, we're just lacking in Cambridge, and it's just it's a matter of years of lacking investment and development of these resources in Cambridge, and it's really encouraging to see so many people that are interested in this issue.
That's great. And for folks that might be thinking right now that there are some shelter options in Cambridge, I want to qualify that in these conversations, we're talking about women experiencing homelessness who are also experiencing the intersex of gender-based violence, which is a different shelter system than our VAW sector, just to qualify that. Roz, what are your thoughts in terms of the biggest challenge coming from the service desert that is Cambridge?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for all those numbers, Cameron. I think I would overlay on top of that sort of what that looks like for service providers who are trying to support women. For instance, at YWCA Cambridge, we have Small Steps to Success. It's a pre-employment life skills program. It helps women who have been out of the labor market for however long, for various reasons, who have been encountering numerous barriers, help them get the skills and confidence they need to get back into the workforce, if that's what they choose. But a lot of the individuals who are coming to that program, but a lot of our women's programming, they're facing a whole other, like, it's not just to get a job, it's also to have a place to live. We have participants who are living in their cars or who are facing evictions, rent evictions and dem evictions. And we're doing, our staff are doing the best that they can to support them. But just as Cameron has laid out, and as Marjorie has laid out, there is nowhere to actually send individuals for support. So everyone, and I know a lot of our neighborhood associations, they're supporting a lot of individuals who are living in the encampments, who are experiencing housing precarity or extreme poverty. And we do what we can, provide snacks and warming kits, but ultimately what we should have in front of us is actually like a place for someone to go to sleep and to have security and safety. And I don't know if this is the opportunity to bring it up, but actually, you know what, you're going to ask about it later, so maybe I'll get to it later. But I think and this is one thing that we pointed out. So we were really lucky to have a lot of service providers give us their insights to help us inform the recent research report that I think, Jen, you just put in the chat. But so many social service organizations are supporting individuals who are facing homelessness or at risk of it off the sides of their desk. We're not funded to do this. Cameron pointed out the disparity in funding in the region, and this is no shade on the region. I understand, like, you've got a lot of priorities. There's a lot of people here, but I think what a lot of individuals don't really see, I think what people don't really see is just how difficult it is if all the services are in Kitchener, how difficult it is to actually get there. If you don't have a car, if you have a car, it's still 40 minutes, horrible traffic, and it's not easy. But if you have to take the bus and you've got your support system here, you've got your family here, you've got whatever, like the small support network you have is here. It's not easy to get back to if you're going to Kitchener-Waterloo for shelter and other homeless services. So this comes back to the right to housing. I do want us to get away from this Dickensian view of, well, do you have a place to sleep? Good. Or if you're homeless, it's your fault. It's not so much about just giving people a bed and a meal. It's really realizing the right to safety and security, and just decency. And I really want that discussion to kind of really keep coming forth in these spaces.
Marjorie, yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't see how hard you were shaking your head with some of that. So let me hear what you have to say on this.
It's really, the service desert thing is huge. If you have to go to court, you have to go to Kitchener. Oftentimes, depending on what is ailing you, you have to go to hospital in Kitchener or Waterloo. You have a problem with child services, you're in Kitchener, Waterloo. But it's not just, we are thinking of the younger women, but one of the hardest things I've ever had to do was to try and find housing for seniors. I had an 84-year-old woman who worked all her life and was so underpaid that her pension couldn't pay rent. And I couldn't find anywhere for her to go. And I won't say out loud how I did it because it was some real bandula business that I did behind the doors and in back corridors that I finally got her into a seniors housing situation. But that was in Waterloo. And her entire support system is in Cambridge. But I could get her in, so I did. But I had another woman, the only place I could get her in for supportive housing was London. That was the closest place I could find of supportive housing to put her in. And what happened there is a whole other story. but it just proves the vulnerability of women right across the spectrum. The fastest route to poverty and to homelessness is a cessation, the end of a relationship. Women are in the home longer, they're with the children longer, they don't have the savings, they don't have the build-up so that they have something to retire on. They have nothing to fall back on. So when they fall homeless, there is nothing to back them up. There is nothing to back them up. It is a huge problem, and it runs the entire gamut of those who identify as women. Young, the very young, to the very old are suffering in this.
Thank you, Marjorie. Courtney, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, just for more statistics, about 30% of our clients we're moving are in Cambridge, but only 6% of our referral partners are in Cambridge. So that means our clients are having to go to service providers in other areas. So whether it's Kitchener, Waterloo, Brantford, Guelph. So how many are we missing?
Absolutely. Okay. So Marjorie and Courtney, I want to highlight the two of you for this next question, because I know a lot of your work directly requires building a high degree of trust. You're both showing up at very vulnerable times and very big moments in people's lives. So one of the things that happens in a service desert is trust gets broken because there aren't options for women in terms of support. And those natural networks of more formal supports are harder to create if they're able to be created. So how can we start to rebuild trust with women who have experienced homelessness in Cambridge, as well as its intersects of gender-based violence, who have been left without support or with minimal support or back alley support? How do we rebuild that trust?
I can start. So I think one of the initial things that we need to do is trust one another as service providers. So when we can work together to provide wraparound supports to our clients, they can see that we trust each other, and that helps a little bit, but also we need to trust them. So one of the things that we do within Shelter Movers is not asking them to retell their story, not asking them too many questions. We believe them. The more we show trust in the clients that we're serving, the more that they're going to trust us as well, and removing those barriers for them too. So, you know, they don't have to jump a bunch of hoops to access our services.
Oh, Marjorie, you're just on, yeah.
I think we have to look at how we deal with motherhood, women with children. You know, I have a situation now where basically she has separated from this man. And what he does is he withholds money from her so that she can't pay her rent. So that every time you turn around, she has had to move because the landlord is refusing to wait for this money to come in. And without that money, she cannot maintain her rent. So eventually what he's going to do is he's going to take this and look, she's not stable. She's not housing these children correctly. Therefore, I need to have custody of these children and not her. I can't tell you how many times this has played out in courts. Now, how do you get somebody to trust you when they know that that is what will happen to them? How do you trust somebody to say, okay, I know you are homeless. Let us speak to the authorities to get help. And then they apprehend your children. What happens when you have to live in a car with your children and you appeal for housing because you need housing for these children so they're not apprehended? They apprehend them anyway, and they give them to an abusive partner who ODs, and the children come home and find him anyway, because they will not help you find housing with your children safely. We need to change the way we interact with women, and especially women with children. We need to stop victimizing them. We need to look at it as a family unit and not punish them because they're homeless or because their financial circumstances are less than. And until we do that, we will not gain the trust of many women, and they will continue to be hiding with their children.
Cameron, Roz, do you have anything to add to this piece?
I think part of it is also, it's not all just on service providers, but it's also on sort of the broader community. I think our media, like news media, has really, I don't want to say gotten better, I'm not criticizing, but in the way that they cover issues of like the encampments or homelessness, they're interviewing people who are living it. And I think it is putting more of a human face on these issues than historically has been done. So just on that sort of public discourse level, having a deeper understanding of these issues. And then also it is incumbent on our policymakers to make their constituents understand investments in social funding. I would just say that.
Absolutely. For folks who have just joined, because we've had a few, just a reminder that you are able to add questions to the chat. I've seen a couple come through now, so you have that opportunity as well. I'm going to pivot us. I want to talk to Courtney and Roz. We're going to start with you two on this one. What are common misconceptions people have about women's homelessness, and how can we combat these misconceptions and bring community together? So just how do we solve the whole problem? What are some, let's start with some misconceptions, and Marjorie and Cameron, I know you have some insights on this too. So what are some misconceptions around women's homelessness that you know of?
That it isn't as big a problem as men's homelessness. Number one, I spoke earlier about how women's homelessness tends by and large to be hidden, and so it's not counted. And so it's very easy. I mean, policymakers, and I'm not throwing shade at anyone in the room, it's just I'm phrasing this the best way I know how, but policymakers will respond to the most obvious, or like the squeaky wheel, right? And so women's homelessness isn't really as squeaky a wheel as men's homelessness. So it does exist, it is a crisis, and it is happening. We tried to crunch numbers because we can't count women's homelessness. It is impossible. We looked to an incredible research organization called the Women's National Housing and Homelessness Network, and they discuss, okay, yes, we can't really count homelessness, but we can at least triangulate the data we have. So we know that 7% of women will or have experienced homelessness within their lifetimes. And we can also look at rates of childhood poverty, of low income. Women are concentrated in low income jobs or part-time work, and all of that is a very gendered thing itself. You know, there are all these sort of issues that kind of inform why women's homelessness is happening and why it's so serious. But if we look at the numbers, so 70-something thousand women living in Kitchener, if we take 7% of that, it's, no one could check my math here, but just consider this ballparking because I don't have my notes in front of me because I'm negligent, but like 6,000 women would be considered low income in Cambridge. So if you're low income, you're either experiencing or very close to experiencing homelessness. Even most of us, we talk a lot of our government wants to talk about middle class, but almost no one's middle class anymore. So many of us, even in these white collar jobs, are 1, 2, 3 paychecks away from losing everything. It is so easy to become homelessness, and there's too many people in power who won't recognize that, I think. Sorry, I'll stop there.
I think some of the misconceptions that we see a lot are that, people experiencing homelessness all have addictions, or there's mental health problems, or they're abusing the system, or they're uneducated, or, there's all of these stigmas around who is accessing supports. And, it's really interesting to see the wide range of people we're supporting in the community. And, like Roz said, a lot of us are 1, 2, 3 paychecks away. A lot of individuals that need support on paper look like they probably don't, but when they're being controlled financially by their partner, they don't have access to any of the money, even if it's money that they're earning on their own. So, I think we all need to come together with a little bit of compassion and understanding that we don't know all sides to the story, and everyone's situation is a little bit different, and we all handle it in different ways as well. So yeah, I think we need to remove the stigma around homelessness and what people's perception of that is.
I just want to add also, as you were sort of speaking to as well, Courtney, but just that there's a perception that homelessness is a homeless person's fault, and that we obviously have to get away from. It is homelessness and the rising number of people living unhoused in our region, and it is ballooning right now and forecasted to continue ballooning, tripling by 2028 if we do not intervene. That is a system's failure. That is all levels of government failing. It is not that individual's fault. It's not solely incumbent on our region to respond to, our municipalities, but it is all levels of government who must be responding to this. And it's not the individual's fault.
I don't
Yeah,
think
it's that
people-
victim blaming, right? We see that with a lot of the individuals that we're supporting that are experiencing gender-based violence, that it's in some way their fault.
I don't think people really understand who is homeless in our cities. As you both, Roz and Courtney, were saying, people have this perception. But if you had told me that I would end up homeless at any point, I would have laughed at you. And yet I did. And the entire time I was homeless, I was working 6 days a week. So, you know, it's if you stay out there long enough, for sure you're going to have some mental health issues. You stay out there long enough, I would not be surprised that you had addiction issues, because it's called trying to survive and trying to cope. But we do have a large problem in our society in that people don't understand just who is homeless, and they focus on a small percentage of people. On all that to say that everybody deserves housing. It's a right for everybody, regardless of their situation and their circumstances. But there are a lot of people out there who are homeless who are working and working hard at more than one job. But because of the state of the economy, they cannot find anywhere to live.
And they deserve safe and adequate housing. We have
Can
seen
I add
people
a
moving
few
into very
misconceptions?
inadequate places.
Just to add and echoing, some of what my colleagues there are saying, and what Marjorie is saying there. So number one, homelessness can't really be fixed with a job. I think that's a misconception that a lot of people have, and just go look at rent prices and you'll see that that's not the case. People need to be making a significant amount of money to be able to afford housing these days. So what are people's options? They're not there. The second one is that people who are homeless in Cambridge are not from Cambridge. That's a myth that just keeps continuing. Somehow people have this idea that it's just so good to be homeless in Cambridge that people are coming here. And that's not the case at all. And so, yes, people, who are from Cambridge can become homeless in Cambridge, and we need to make sure that we have the resources for them. Third misconception, I think, is as Roz was saying about throwing shade, I think we often look at the region as, because it is the housing, manager for our community, as being responsible for dealing with these issues, and it's an all level of government thing, and part of that is the misconception that you can't do this work in Cambridge. You can't build a new shelter in Cambridge. You can't build supportive housing in Cambridge because the community will resist it, and that it won't be supported here. We have to get past that, because the level of urgency is just so big these days, that we have to look at all levels of government and find out what and be advocating to them about what they should be doing, whether it comes to Cambridge or Waterloo region in general. And just the last one, and Roz touched on this, is this misconception that people will take housing anywhere, right? So if we, for example, build a shelter in North Waterloo, and then come to people in Cambridge and say, hey, we've got a bed for you. A lot of people don't understand why won't they go? Well, if somebody came to you and said, you now need to move, an hour and a half bus ride away from everything and your entire support network, some people will say no, and we've certainly seen people who will get the opportunity to have permanent housing, you know, a supportive housing unit in, say, Waterloo, and they choose not to. And fair enough. You know, in this sector, we often use the term that we're meeting people where they're at. But we're not meeting people where they're at in Cambridge, right? There are people in Cambridge, and we need to start meeting them where they're at right here.
One teeny tiny little addition, and something all of us have kind of been speaking to, but just there's also a misconception of what, and I've sort of already said this, but a misconception of what homelessness is. A lot of people who are actually de facto homeless don't even know they're homeless. They wouldn't consider themselves homeless, and they might not even support policy that addresses homelessness. And so I think there's also that, like, well, I just have to work harder. I just have to do better and I'll fix this situation. No, that's not, the system is failing you. You have every right to advocate for policies that actually make it possible for you to have your own home, however you want it to be. If you want to own a condo or a house, fine, great. If you want to rent a decent apartment, you should be able to do that. So I just wanted to say that.
All right, so this question got you all going. It's great to see when advocates get together in a room and get excited. This is what you're looking at, folks. I just want to reiterate, Marjorie, you tell a story, and I'm not asking you to tell that story, but you tell a story about women needing to go to just at a shelter level, building off of Cameron's comment about where supportive housing and affordable housing, actual affordable housing, and transitional housing makes a difference for people. Marjorie, you talk a lot from the shelter perspective of women leaving the community to go and seek shelter in Kitchener-Waterloo and ending up using all of their resources to come back into this community. And that was definitely a theme that was also in the report, Service Provider Insights as well. So I think it hits across all the levels. I'm going to move us into question number 5 here. And so that's where do we go from here? What do we do? How do we make real change? Marjorie and Cameron, I'm going to start with you two. You've both been huge advocates in this community on this topic for quite some time now. So I want to start with your thoughts. What advocacy and/or community investments do you think are needed to address women's homelessness in Cambridge? So we're taking off those financial constraints and everything constraints. What do we need? And you can fight to start, whichever one of you wants to go first.
You know, to bring up a very sore point, how much was it that you were asking for the shelter last year, Cameron?
That was $36,000.
So $36,000 was an ask for a small women's shelter in Cambridge, for which we got turned down. But we have, what, 2 million plus goes to police. They have, I am sure, like every other business in this place, a contingency fund. They have their budget for what they need. Then they're getting a surplus to keep, because I know if I try to keep a surplus, I have to give it back to the government because I have to spend all my money or give it back. So they have all these things and couldn't find $36,000, which is like spitting in a bucket in terms of the big budget, to house 6 women in Cambridge. So then I have to ask, where are the priorities? And why are we not a priority? Why are women not a priority? When you want to talk about the economics and who is producing and who is tax paying, and I'd like to make a point that everybody pays taxes, because every time you buy something, you're paying taxes. So even the person who doesn't work and lies down on the street doing nothing is paying taxes. So I just have to get that pet peeve out. So you talk about economics and economic markets and getting people to work and getting people to do jobs. How do you work when you can't find somewhere to lay your head at night? How do you work when you can't find somewhere to put your children safely, and you can't afford childcare, and you can't afford, and you can't afford, and you can't afford? How do you produce? And at the bottom level of all of this, the thing that really makes the difference is not food, because you can always get food. It's housing. Housing is the most basic building block. So we need a shelter for women. We need somewhere for women in Cambridge to be able to go and be safe. And we really need to look at how we're not building. And again, this is all levels of government. But we don't only have to look at these big builders where the only thing they seem to build is luxury townhouses and apartment buildings. How about some fourplexes? How about some co-ops? How about some things that people can contribute and own together? How about these things? How about interfacing with some of those kinds of builders who are community minded, who want to help the community? People like Induwell. And I use that name because everybody knows them, but they're not the only ones out there who we look at to build, because at the end of the day, the only way we can make any changes is to build. And there are so many people out there who have come up with some immensely crazy places and ways that they can build that would be cheaper and better. But we keep turning away from them. They keep turning away from them. It's time to be outside of the box. It's time to think outside of the box. Yeah, build over all the parking lots. Woo, what a great idea. So many ideas out there. Bottom line, we have to build. Give us our shelter for women, and then get about the business of building affordable, community-minded types of buildings. It can't only be the churches doing those buildings. It has to be everybody. Everybody. And that's what we have. We have to have a shelter. And we have to build. There's no other way out of this. That's just a simple bottom line.
That's me applauding Marjorie. So just adding, what advocacy and community investments. So for one thing that I've been, hoping for, or wishing that we could have is resourcing towards an equity lens, a geographic equity lens in the region of Waterloo. And so I'm not speaking even specifically about housing and homelessness. I mean, this goes on, when it comes to addiction supports, children's mental health. I mean, like, you can go down the list of supports and see, that people have differing access to resources depending on where they live in the region. And so, I think that when we don't study it, right, we have these anecdotes about what the difference is in Cambridge. But it would be really great if we could actually apply a lens to that and say, what is the difference, and from there start to over-resource Cambridge. Because I pointed to the numbers, right? We have so few beds across the spectrum in comparison. And so it's time instead for over-resourcing in Cambridge, because we've been under-resourcing it for a long time. So that would be one piece. Two, Marjorie talked about regional council, and just for clarity, that ask last year was for some staffing towards our women's recovery home. This year we're going back asking for funding for our recovery home, and also the YWCA has a proposal in to build the shelter. This is before council now. And so, if you have an opinion on that, I'm sure council would like to hear that, because they're voting on that on December 13th, and that's the whole plan to end chronic homelessness funding will be up for review then. So that would be another piece of it. And then when it comes to advocacy, I'll just say I've met lots of great housing advocates who are typically right in KW and focused on in KW. And there are a lot of folks who are crossing the 401 and coming to do some housing advocacy and supports here. And I just really encourage that. And I think about a couple of examples, like, I'm not sure how long ago it was. I still have pandemic brain of I don't remember when things happened, but there was an encampment in Kitchener, and a bulldozer was brought in to bulldoze the tents. And it was so upsetting to people that there were like 100 people that came out to protest that. It happened in Cambridge too, at Silver Park. There was a bulldozer bulldozing tents. and there are a lot of people I think on this call who were there providing support there, but we didn't have a big protest afterwards. There was an article, and then it just kind of floated by. We don't have that same kind of level of advocacy in the community that are pointing out these really, really critical issues. And I think that's a message that I would have as well, that we need to have like a whole of region approach when it comes to advocating for these pieces, but also having that geographic equity lens that's going to look at where are these services missing, and what do we need to do to actually equalize access.
Just quick addition, I see the time. I want to add on what Marjorie said about priorities. A lot of folks say we've got too many priorities. We certainly can't fund them all. But if we actually calculated the costs of hallway medicine, on the number of unhoused people who are seeking care or a bed in the hospitals, or the criminalization of poverty, what that is costing us to police poverty right now. Ashley from the clinic just put in the chat that it was $11,000 for contractors to bulldoze an encampment. This is all money that could have been redirected. So it is really, we have to think about our priorities. And in terms of advocacy, there are so many issues we all want to advocate on. It is really difficult to know when and how and what to say. Follow other organizations that are in this group, not just people on the panel, but there's a lot of really incredible organizations that are in this Zoom call right now, but that are doing the advocacy, giving you those points where you can link in. And honestly, it cannot be overstated how valuable it is to write to your MPs and MPPs. They get the letters, they have to respond, and they have to be mindful of what their constituents are asking of them.
Okay, so we're rounding out question 6, which is our last question, our last formal question. So if folks do have thoughts brewing, questions, please start throwing them in the chat. I want to do this popcorn style, mixing it up a little bit. So the question I have here is, what is your, and I know this might take a second to sort of edit yourself into one thing, but your number one way that we can make a substantial difference on this issue, either generally or together today. So you're focusing in down on one thing. And I'm going to start with Roz, because Roz seems to look the least scared of that question. Roz, after you answer the question, pick someone else, one of your other panelists to answer.
I'm a big fan of building out, that's kind of, I hate using a business term like network, but build out your network of people who are speaking on this issue. Right now, there's a group of us on this panel who are convening an ad hoc committee in Cambridge to discuss women's homelessness and address all the gaps and how we can support each other. The biggest thing, I guess, really is just build your network of like-minded advocates who are doing this work. You can't do it yourself. You're not expected to do it yourself. I think that's the biggest thing I would say. I don't know how helpful that is, sorry. Courtney.
Mine kind of goes along with what Roz said. It's the community awareness and understanding, and to remove that stigma. And we all need to kind of come together to make that happen. Cameron?
Yeah, I'll just repeat, the adding the geographic equity lens to adding a gendered lens, right, to the way that we're resourcing, to look at the issues more broadly, and also, I mean, what supports lack that also contribute to women and people becoming homeless in Cambridge, right? What other supports are not available here that might also feed into that, and from there, over resourcing Cambridge until we find some geographic equity. And Marjorie.
Action is my number one plan. And what I feel, building on Roz, is that we need to get together a team to actually make the plan for action. London made a plan for action. They identified the funding from the federal government. They put together a plan, applied for the money, and got it. And now they will be able to build. And what we need more than anything is to build. So we need people who are willing to work together to build that plan for us to be able to get what we need to get to do what we need to do. But action is my big thing.
So I'm going to pivot us into action, because I know by now there's probably a number of people in the audience that are ready and racing and wanting to do something. And we had a question that came through earlier, and you guys have all talked about this throughout, but maybe we can bring it into a concentrated focus. Are there any advocacy letters that can be signed or work that can be supported right now as organizations who support those experiencing homelessness? So at the local level, provincial, federal, what do you guys know of that people could get involved in that could possibly help move along this issue or address it?
We have a team at the region who are developing the plan to end chronic homelessness. They are doing incredible work trying to develop this plan that will really, truly address homelessness, and they could use public support for what they're trying to push forward. So I don't have links in front of me, but look up the plan to end chronic homelessness, learn about it, and share your support with regional council. Tell them that you support this investment. I think that's one immediate way.
Roz, can I ask you just to speak to the message that you just put in the chat, just in case people aren't able to see it, because you gave a list of some other organizations that might be interesting to follow along with.
Oh yeah, so just in terms of how to link into places and people to find who are doing this work that you can follow, or who are sharing letters and petitions you can sign, I'm suggesting following Women's National Housing and Homelessness Network. They issued an incredible claim to the Federal Housing Advocate, which outlined how the federal government is failing to address women's homelessness. And then Canadian Alliance on Homelessness, Center for Housing Rights, follow those groups on any social channels you're on, sign up for their mailing lists. And then also counselors and staffers who are presenting or speaking around council tables at municipally or regionally. Those who are trying to push for progressive change and advance human rights and justice receive a lot of hate mail from people who don't want to see their tax dollars go into lazy homeless people. So sending them letters of support or notes of support just by email doesn't have to be too long or formal, but I think that can go a long way because they get a lot of hate.
Yeah, just to add on to that, and just seeing, Lynn has a question there about location's a huge issue in Cambridge. How will location be determined? Allows, and that's the message that we hear a lot, right? Like I agree, Lynn, that anytime we have this conversation about how it is that we provide these resources in Cambridge, it comes down to location and how will we get the political will to make it happen. And so I think that I don't have links for you and that sort of thing, but again, you see folks in KW like the YIMBY, like Yes in My Backyard, folks, right, who are pushing for these kinds of solutions and saying, no, these need to be integrated into the community. They need to be available here. We need more of those voices speaking up in Cambridge. So, when these things do come to council, go delegate, email your councillors and that sort of thing. Get the message out there that there is support for these resources in Cambridge, because that message that that you can't build these things in Cambridge without having all kinds of resistance should also be you can build these things and you'll get all kinds of celebration and support from people in Cambridge as well.
Because the thing is that those who are against these things are actually a very small group of people, but they're very loud. And sadly, those of us who really support this kind of things tend to be quiet and not step up to speak to the issue. And so people really need to start making the effort to step forward and speak. We have to drown out those little voices. We can't allow them to dictate what we want for our city, what we want for our citizens, because it's our city and we need to stand up for it.
I always want to leave like 5 minutes after each one of your speeches, Marjorie, because they're always so pointed and so like everything is take home what Marjorie's saying with it. Okay, so we have another sort of question in here. It was more of a statement, and I want to see your responses to this. So the comment was, we need to rethink how best to support any age or gender who become unhoused. What we're doing is not enough. So let's, what do you guys see as potential ways of this could be different? We could be doing this different. That system could be different. Have you read anything? Have you seen anything? Cameron, yeah.
Marjorie brought up London, and I think London's an interesting model to take a look at because you know, when we think of shelters, right, we usually think of, you know, I mean, if we're in Cambridge, right, the Bridges shelter, it's a big honking building, right, and when that can house, I think 85 beds right now, 85 people, and then, you know, also provide all kinds of other supports, and you know, that big sort of model is great at getting people indoors, but at the same time, it's not great at getting all the people indoors, because there are all kinds of reasons why people might not be going into shelter. And so, you know, London's plan seems to take that into consideration, in that they're, instead of, you know, having kind of large shelters, they're looking at small hubs, they're calling them. And so you could have, you know, for example, one of the issues that people will talk about is substance use in shelter. And so, you know, there are folks who are trying to stay away from that. There are folks that are comfortable with that. The folks that are trying to stay away from that, they might choose to live rough instead. Couldn't we then have a smaller shelter that would accommodate those needs, or couples, or people with pets, or youth, or seniors, or right? And you know, instead of looking at that really big model, can we be looking at, you know, more targeted, smaller scale, more comfortable, safe sort of settings, where we can actually, you know, serve the diversity of the community in ways that they actually need.
We have a real thing. I'm on the board at the shelter, and I've been so impressed with them there. They are housing so many people, but you know why? Because they go out in the community and they speak to people and get people to rent to people coming into their shelter. And who is coming to the shelter? So many older people now. So many elders are ending up homeless. So many fragile elders are now coming into shelter. People are being discharged from hospital to the shelter. So when we talk about, you know, how many groups of people and who is homeless out there, it's very scary. It's very scary. What do we do with fragile elders? People who need medical attention, who cannot live alone. What are we doing? You know, are looking at the hubs, as you were saying, Cameron, can make a big difference. Maybe we need to have some of these hubs where we're mixing families with small children and elders, so that, you know, that could create a better environment for people. And we can do all these hubs and all these plans for shelter, but we need homes more than anything else. So our population is only going to age. And more people of age than young people are going to be seeking shelter soon. And we need to look at what that shelter will look like, because accessibility will be huge. And we haven't really touched on accessibility problem, but a lot of people who are in our encampments are there because they can't access shelters anyway. So how are we going to make changes for these people? Because this is going to be huge. But housing, especially supportive housing, is going to be key. And we need to look at that big time.
Wait, I have a question here. So it'll be very challenging to provide those types of supports, recognizing limited regional resources and limited financial support for emergency shelter from the city of Cambridge. What is the plan to fund meet housing first mandates and wraparound supports? Roz, do you want to talk about this in the context of the shelter proposal that's put forward? Or we can...
I missed had a trouble understanding the question. I'm just trying to find it in the chat. I'm also mindful of the time though.
We have
if anyone else wants to speak.
Yeah. We have until 1:15 at the latest before we turn it over to Ashley. So the question was talking about limited resources at the regional level as well as the city of Cambridge level. So what is the plan to fund housing that meets Housing First mandates and wraparound supports?
Yeah, it's built right into the plan to end chronic homelessness that we have to advocate at the provincial and federal levels. We have, like, all of us have to join our voices in that. The province is sitting on a lot of money. The feds obviously have a lot of money to disperse, and so we have to be the squeaky wheel and really advocate for those dollars to make their way down. And sorry, you wanted us to speak to the funding model. I'm getting a little fog brain. Jen, if you wanted to speak a little to our proposal, please go ahead. But that's the answer that came to mind for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's a good time to hit up those people for money. Elections are coming. People want to look good. That's why you need to have your plan in place so that you can beat them up for the money, because they're going to start having to give that money to make themselves look good. So it's time to really make the plans, because go after the money. It's sitting there and we need it.
Absolutely. Cameron, you've talked about this a number of times, and both Roz, what you've said, and Marjorie, I think it lends to this as well. Well, I have two questions left. This one is just, you've talked about taking a stronger equity lens. We've talked about gender equity lens. We've talked about geographic equity lens. What do you see an equity lens looking like in local decision making? What would that look like? How could that work?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think, first we need the data, right? The numbers that I talked about when it came to population of Cambridge compared to the level of services, some of those numbers I was able to find in the plan to end chronic homelessness, and I went, oh, finally I can calculate, how much housing actually is available, or how much of these supports are actually available in Cambridge. And again, I would say, across the the spectrum of of supports of all different types of supports in all different sectors. We need to get that data. We need to actually look at it and say, how much of this funding is actually going to one specific community, or another example is we're part of the counseling collaborative, and so we're funded to do counseling with people on OW and ODSP. And it turned out that for years, Cambridge was getting a smaller portion of that funding compared to its population, especially compared to its population of people that were on OW and ODSP. Once we finally got the data, like our partners at Camino said, okay, well, we'll make you whole, and that was an amazing thing to do. But it required us to track down the data, and that's where I think that there needs to be some resources put into doing that research, whether that's at the regional level, whether that's outside of the region, I'm not sure. But I think that without having that information, it's all anecdotal right now, and so we need to look at systems more broadly. I'll just add to what Roz said. Watching the deliberations at regional council when it comes to the plan to end chronic homelessness, I mean, the focus really is on how can we continue to pay for this out of the tax levy? It's not the most equitable way of taxing people, compared to the tools that the provincial and federal governments have. And I guess the question is, are the provincial and federal governments taking this issue seriously? And there's another comment in the chat that says, how do you continue to find hope? And that's a struggle. And I continue to find hope in projects like this, and groups like the YWCA, and people like Marjorie and Courtney and what they're doing in the community. But it's very much at the individual level, because when we start to look at a more macro level, I don't have a lot of hope that we're really taking this issue as seriously as we should. And Marjorie's talked a lot about how close so many people are to needing housing and homelessness supports. And I think that we're still just riding that wave, right? Interest rates are high, rent continues to get higher. And every month there are more people that are losing their housing. And we're just seeing those numbers continue to spike. And without radical intervention, I don't know how we how the region doesn't have the tools to do that. We have a lot of people that are working really hard to help as many people as they can, but without a much broader intervention, they can't do it alone.
Let's ask everybody else that question around hope. How do you maintain hope?
For me, it's the people in our community that choose to volunteer with us and with other organizations, and seeing those individuals spend the extra time that they have with us, that gives me hope.
I have to hope. There is not an alternative to that. I celebrate every little victory, however small. And I just know that we have to. When I meet with families and I meet with kids and I talk to them about their future and how to find a path forward, what I am doing is giving them hope that they can make changes and that they can make goals and they can thrive. And I have to hope that that will continue for everybody. Because if I don't have hope, then what do I have? Nothing. So yeah, I will always continue to hope.
Yeah, Marjorie, that's amazing. Yeah. I honestly, what everyone's saying, I think it's that building community around these issues and not like breaking down these silos. And I think in Cambridge, arts organizations are working really hard to just support each other. And sharing this, having this shared goal of actually responding to these crises. So it's that in that collective voice and that feeling of community, I think is where I find hope.
I've done an incredible job of not interceding with my ideas, which we all joked about was going to be an interesting exercise for me, but I'm going to add my hope to this one. I am excited about the awareness that is coming when it comes to women's homelessness in Cambridge. I think it's far overdue, and I'm optimistic by the turnout we had today, by the inquisitive minds, by the support that I've seen people give our panelists as well as each other. And I think that we are at a point in our community where it just can't get worse. And I think that is a really hard place to start from. Or we can't let it get worse. It's a hard place to start from, but it's a really, it's a foundation. It's no longer could it possibly get worse and be tolerable. So I think that's an opportunity for all of us. And I know we have a lot of service providers in this chat. Thank you for adding this knowledge to the work that you do and contributing to that knowledge in various ways. Thank you for everyone who came.
Can I just add something quickly?
Absolutely.
So we recently had a client contact us, and her young child had said, can you please let the team know that they have shown me that good people still exist in this world? And that's like everybody that is here, everyone that's spoken and everyone that's attended. You are the good people in this world.
That's fantastic. So thank you everyone who attended. I'm going to bring Ashley forward now to just give a little bit of an update about the encampment court cases going on. And for those of you who are leaving us, again, there is a January event coming. It will talk about that political will, and you will get some more information along with this recording there, but hopefully you're able to stay and hear what Ashley has to say. So on that note, Ashley, it's all yours.
Hi. Thanks. Thank you for letting me speak. And what a great panel, everyone. This is so nice. Courtney, I'm like wiping away my tears about your comment at the end. That's so lovely. So on the message of hope, I'm happy to be able to talk to you about a recent decision from the Ontario Superior Court out of Kingston. I will say, it's not a perfect decision, but I'm trying to remain very hopeful about this decision. It is a positive decision for the people that were living in an encampment in Kingston. And it's similar to our decision from Waterloo Region, in which it found that the state cannot interfere with people's rights to shelter themselves. So it is a big win in that regard. There's two really important, cool takeaways from this case is that, and which one that I'm hopeful will help us in our advocacy efforts around Cambridge in particular, is that this case really tells us that the type of property that people are living on does not matter. So I think after the Waterloo decision, there was a lot, and I heard from a lot of people who'd heard from politicians and people working within municipalities that were thinking that our decision may be limited because it was in regards to a property that was considered to be a vacant lot. So I think a lot of people were thinking, well, that case doesn't really apply elsewhere. And what we see from the Kingston decision is that this was a park. It was an encampment that was at Bell Park in Kingston. And I'll talk a bit about the actual legal aspects of it, but basically the type of property, it doesn't matter. And I'm very hopeful that municipalities will clue into this. And I'm hopeful that we'll see no longer resources being wasted on trying to evict people living at encampments, and no longer resources being wasted on trying to, take our homeless neighbors to court and all of these when we talk about money, we know that our governments can come up with money when they need to. And so I'm really, really hopeful that we're going to stop wasting resources on these types of things. The other kind of interesting takeaway from this decision is that although the court case was just about this one encampment location, the judge actually gave quite a broad, tailored a pretty broad remedy in which he read into the bylaw to make it apply to the entire city of Kingston. So what it means is that people that are sheltering, the city's not allowed to limit overnight sheltering anywhere in the city. So it doesn't apply just to that encampment that was at issue in court. So it's a broad remedy, and it's quite interesting. It's different than the remedy we had in Waterloo Region. So I'm just going to talk really briefly about the facts. I think people that have been following along in the media probably know about this case. We were watching it very closely at Waterloo at our clinic, and sending huge congratulations to our Kingston clinic colleagues who, supported the people, the encampment residents in this case, and have largely seen a victory. So this encampment existed in Bell Park in Kingston. It's been there since about 2020. And there were various iterations of the city trying to evict people and then saying, no, we're not going to. And there were evictions, and then people came back. At the time of the court ruling, there were about 35 people living at this encampment. And it was right beside an integrated care hub in Kingston. So this is a city-funded service provider for consumption services and a drop-in healthcare center. We spoke, our clinic, we spoke with some people that were working there that were very concerned about evictions and the impact it would have on the people living there. Just as an interesting point, we heard from our Kingston clinic colleagues a lot of difficulties they had in trying to get service providers in Kingston to give them affidavits. And the issue is that a lot of people that are providing services to people that were living at this encampment are funded by the city of Kingston. So they were quite hesitant and quite nervous to go on record as going against their funder. So that's an interesting thing. And, of course, we need funding to come from these municipalities, but if the municipalities are going to then go to court, it becomes quite tricky. So just something to think about. This was in a park, but the decision said specifically it was not near a playground. It wasn't near a dog park or anything like that. Not that I think would necessarily matter, and I'll talk about that legal analysis. So the city, similar to what we have in Waterloo Region, they had an encampment protocol, and that protocol really focused on volunteer departure, trying to provide supports and get people to voluntarily leave the encampment. This is things that we're familiar with when we heard about the eviction at 150 Main, that it's a voluntary. So we know these things aren't necessarily voluntary, but this is the language that governments like to use in these types of policies. So anyways, they had, and also I guess I should echo Roz in saying no shade in any of my comments, but we know voluntary really does not mean voluntary. So anyways, there's lots of back and forth with the city about whether or not they're going to evict these people. Procedurally, the city decided to go to court, similar to the region of Waterloo, and to seek the court's permission essentially to enforce their bylaws and to evict people from that were living at this encampment. So procedurally, it's similar to our case. And the distinction is that the city actually, when they got to court, and this is interesting, when the city got to court, they conceded that they didn't have enough spaces. So their point in time count was showing they had about 480 people experiencing homelessness in Kingston. And they said, you know, we don't have enough shelter space. So they conceded that. That was a big fight we had to have here in Waterloo Region, because the region was holding firm that because they had night overnight capacity, that they had enough spaces. But the city of Kingston said, you know what, we agree that we just don't have enough spaces. So that was a difference. And the question that the court was really being asked was whether or not their bylaw was constitutional, and the court held that it was not constitutional. So it violates people's rights to life, liberty, and security of the person. And it's doing so in a way that is grossly disproportionate. So that's kind of what I want to tell you about this legal analysis about the property. So what the court is asked to do is it's supposed to look at the effects of the deprivation on people's life, liberty, and security of the person. So we know that when people don't have the ability to shelter themselves, they're going to die. There's going to be loss of limb. There will be death. And what the court is asked to do is to look at if it's rationally supported. The law is rationally supported by this. So they're balancing. They're looking at the deprivations and they're comparing it to the purposes of the law. And there's a really great finding at paragraph 86 of this judgment. And it says, so we know when we talk about these bylaws, the objectives are typically around regulating property for people's use and enjoyment. That's what these bylaws are really typically getting at, right? And so what the court said is that although the objectives of the bylaw, so the purpose, the reason why these bylaws exist are laudable, they're not so compelling that they can be secured at the expense of the lives of Kingston's homeless population. And I think that that is the key message that people need to take away and need to understand. So I'm hopeful that we're not going to see any more cases like this, because it's a waste of time. It doesn't matter what your bylaw says. It doesn't matter the purpose of your bylaw. It will never stand up or compare or balance against people's lives. And so, you know, I hope, if we're remaining hopeful, that people will clue into this, and that our municipalities will realize that this is the law. This is the law as it exists in Canada. And, you know, it's not going to change regardless of what the bylaw says, regardless of the objectives or the purpose of the bylaw. And it says, you know, specifically in this analysis that the court is not to consider the societal benefits of the law. So maybe, you know, maybe the park is really important to people, and that's great, but whatever benefits society gets from the law, that's not part of this analysis. It doesn't matter. So the other takeaway from this case, and I forget how many minutes I have, but I do want to leave time for questions as well. One of the other takeaways from this case is important for like a legal analysis for us is the judge was talking about some of the expert testimony. And so it doesn't matter. The City of Kingston lawyers were trying to argue that Dr. Andrea Sarita, she was one of our experts. She's a primary care physician in London. They were trying to argue that her testimony shouldn't be given that much weight, and the testimony of the other experts shouldn't be given that much weight because, you know, they've never been to the encampment. They didn't know these encampment residents. And the judge was very clear that that doesn't matter when we're providing expert evidence. It doesn't matter if the experts, you know, have been to this property or, you know, have met with any of the residents. The issue with this decision is that the rights were not extended to daytime sheltering. So this can create some real problems for people that are living in encampments, because where are they supposed to go, right? They don't have anywhere actually to go. The problem is the judge didn't say that, like he didn't rule out the possibility of a right to daytime sheltering existing at some point. But what he said was that there wasn't enough evidence for him to find that this was a violation in this case. So he was talking about how there was like hardly any evidence for him on what spaces were available for people during the day, how many people could attend at those spaces, how long they could stay, or what services were offered. So practically, you know, it does make things quite tricky. You know, we don't know what's going to happen to people during the day. So in theory, the city of Kingston could go back to court and ask for people to be evicted during the day. I'm really hopeful that they'll just work together to come up with a solution. But what this does tell us is that, you know, if we do have to go forward with cases in the future, people that are advocating for people living in encampments will have to be mindful of coming up with this evidence, finding out this evidence, and making it very clear to a court that there is nowhere for people to go during the day. And then that's how you move that sort of case law forward. There is another case out of Toronto, which I'll just talk to briefly. So this was an encampment that was set up outside of the Church of St. Stephen in Toronto. And this is procedurally different. So Jen, I don't know if you want me to answer some questions about Kingston, or I'll just talk about this case and then I can answer some questions sort of globally.
Let's do that.
Okay. So this City of Toronto case is different. So what happened is the city was trying to evict people, and the encampment residents actually went to court to seek an interim injunction. So what happens in those cases is it moves very quickly, and it's really difficult for people to gather the evidence that they need to show a charter breach. And it's just, the judge is just making a very preliminary, quick decision about whether or not the city should be stopped from doing this eviction. They're not doing the fulsome charter analysis. They're not looking at whether or not the charter is actually violated. They're doing this 3-part test, which in my opinion is really problematic when we're talking about charter rights, because it doesn't actually, take into account how important and how serious these charter rights are. So there's some facts which I would say are sort of, bad facts, which sort of led to this decision. Ultimately, the judge in this case decided that that in the interim, he was not going to grant the injunction to the people living at the encampment, which means that the city could evict in that case. And the fulsome charter merits decision is going to be held in the new year. I imagine, I'm hopeful that it will be similar to the Waterloo decision and the Kingston one, because it's looking at the full scope of the evidence and the charter rights. But in this interim decision, the judge held that there was not the balance. The judge is doing a balance and convenience test, and the judge held in that case that the balance was on the side of the city. And so some facts to keep in mind about this, which I think possibly led to this decision, is that there were the city identified this encampment as a priority, and accommodation was offered to all of these encampment residents by way of hotel. So the city made hotel spaces available for as long as people needed it for everyone living at this encampment. And so it's really unfair for the other people living in the city of Toronto that aren't being offered these spaces. And we know that, living in a hotel is not housing. It's not really what we need. But that was, I think, a main factor in the judge's decision in this case, that people were offered a space to go. And then there was also a lot of evidence around fires at this location. There'd been 3 within the past few months, and it was within 50 meters of a school. So it seemed like that was a big concern for the judge, the fire safety, and that was really what the balancing was. So this balancing that's being done in these types of interim injunction cases, I think, is really problematic for encampment cases. I don't think it's the type of legal test we need. We need the fulsome merit analysis, which is being done in the Waterloo decision and the Kingston decision. And so, we see the judges and, people experiencing homelessness and their advocates having to rush to court to try to stop the city from evicting, and they're not able to gather the evidence that they really need to support their case. And then the legal analysis is flawed in these types of cases. So that's sort of the update. There were 2 recent cases. The Kingston one, I think, will hopefully create really positive results for people living in encampments, because it's quite clear that they have a right. You can't be deprived of your right to life, liberty, and security of the person. You have a right to shelter yourself overnight. And hopefully municipalities will clue into that going forward. So that's sort of the update on those cases. We do have a letter I wrote in the comments about advocacy supports that people can support if they want. We have a letter going to the Cambridge mayor and the councillors, updating them on this case and asking them to no longer move forward with evictions of encampments in Cambridge. just as a note, I think it's really great to encourage people to go speak at council and all these things, but it's really hard to speak at Cambridge Council. I think the bylaws are really restrictive. So maybe that's another advocacy avenue, because if you don't live in Cambridge, it's really difficult for you to try to present or, attend at Cambridge Council. So I think that that's something that maybe we should be advocating for as well.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Ashley, for that update. There was one question in the chat, but I think you kind of have spoken to it, that it's an ongoing sort of situation that you guys are working on in Cambridge. So on that note, I think we will end here. Thank you to everybody who came, and for all of our panelists, as well as Ashley, for giving us some more insights that we can bring into our everyday work, into our lives, and that we can use as tools of advocacy. Thank you all for attending. And again, January, we'll be talking with some local politicians on this topic and starting to understand the work that they're trying to do or wish they could do, as well as bringing a little bit more of where that political will is in our community to make those changes. So I will send out all of that information so you're able to sign up for that one as well. Thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon.